Everyone in the restaurant believed the most dangerous moment of the afternoon would be the lunch rush, but they were about to discover that fate doesn't knock before it changes a life forever. At exactly 12:17 p.m., Harbor Table was alive with the familiar rhythm Naomi Brooks had spent 7 years building from nothing. Plates glided across polished oak tables, fresh coffee filled the air with its warm aroma, and sunlight streamed through the front windows, turning the hardwood floor into ribbons of gold. The small waterfront restaurant in Baltimore wasn't famous for celebrities or politicians. It was known for homemade seafood chowder, honest service, and a quiet promise that everyone who walked through the door would be treated with the same respect. Naomi believed that promise mattered more than any review or award. She had learned long ago that kindness cost nothing until the day it demanded everything. Standing behind the register, she greeted regular customers by name, while keeping one eye on the kitchen and the other on a little boy struggling to color inside a children's menu. It looked like another ordinary Tuesday until the front door opened and silence seemed to drift in with the cold breeze from the harbor. 4 men entered first, all dressed in dark tailored suits, their movements calm, disciplined, and strangely synchronized. They scanned every corner of the restaurant without appearing obvious, exchanging only brief glances before stepping aside. Then the 5th man walked in. He wore a charcoal gray suit that fit as though it had been made for him alone, his crisp white shirt open at the collar without a tie. Expensive but understated. His dark hair was brushed neatly back, and his sharp blue eyes moved across the dining room with quiet awareness instead of arrogance. William Castellano carried himself with the effortless confidence of a man accustomed to being obeyed, yet nothing about his expression invited attention. To every customer inside Harbor Table, he was simply another businessman stopping for lunch. Only his security team knew they were following one of the most powerful men on the East Coast. Naomi welcomed them with the same warm smile she offered everyone else. "Table for 5?" she asked. William returned a polite nod. "Just coffee for now." His voice was calm, almost tired. She led them to a table overlooking the water, poured fresh coffee into a white ceramic mug, and noticed something that didn't belong. His hands, steady only moments before, trembled almost imperceptibly as he reached for the cup. Most people would never have noticed. Naomi did. Years of watching exhausted workers, elderly customers, and parents carrying invisible burdens had taught her that the smallest details often mattered most. William lifted the mug, took one careful sip, and set it back onto the table with unusual slowness. His breathing became uneven. The color drained from his face. One of the suited men leaned forward, asking quietly if everything was all right. But before William could answer, the room shifted in an instant. His shoulders weakened, his eyes lost focus, and he collapsed onto the polished wooden floor. Coffee spilled across the table as dishes rattled and conversations stopped mid-sentence. Someone screamed. Chairs scraped backward. A server froze in place, clutching a tray against her chest. Every instinct told people to step away. Naomi's told her to run toward him. One of the men in dark suits reacted instantly, stepping between William and everyone else as though the entire restaurant had become a threat. Another reached for a phone, his voice steady despite the panic spreading through the room. "Call the private medical team. Now." The third swept his eyes across every face, searching for danger where frightened customers saw only confusion. Naomi ignored all of them. She dropped to her knees beside William, her calm expression standing in sharp contrast to the rising fear around her. "Sir, can you hear me?" she asked firmly, watching for even the smallest response. There was none. She noticed his breathing had become shallow and irregular, his skin unusually pale, and a faint sheen of perspiration covered his forehead. Years earlier, she would have recognized those signs in brightly lit hospital classrooms instead of a neighborhood restaurant. Life had taken her in another direction. But knowledge had a way of remaining quietly alive beneath the surface, waiting for the moment it was needed most. "Do not touch him," one of the security men ordered, stepping forward. "Move away from him now." Naomi looked up only long enough to meet his eyes. "If I move away, you might lose valuable minutes." Her voice carried no anger, only certainty. The man hesitated, torn between protecting his employer and trusting a stranger. Another guard knelt beside William, visibly anxious. "He has physicians. They are coming." Naomi gently placed 2 fingers against William's wrist. The pulse was weak and inconsistent. She listened carefully to each uneven breath before glancing toward the nearest employee. "Melissa, call 911 immediately. Tell them an adult male has collapsed and is unresponsive. Stay on the line until they tell you to hang up." The young waitress nodded, hands shaking as she reached for the restaurant phone. Several customers quietly stepped back to create space without being asked. Others stood frozen, watching the woman who owned the restaurant take command with surprising confidence. Naomi loosened William's suit jacket and collar just enough to help him breathe more comfortably while continuing to monitor his condition. She spoke to him the entire time, her tone calm and reassuring. "Stay with us. Help is coming. Keep fighting." She knew unconscious people could sometimes hear more than anyone realized. The lead security officer stared at her in disbelief. Nothing about her suggested emergency training. She wore a simple navy apron dusted with flour from preparing fresh biscuits that morning, her tightly curled hair gathered neatly behind her head, and comfortable shoes that had carried her across this dining room thousands of times. She looked like exactly what she was, a hardworking restaurant owner. Yet every movement she made was deliberate, efficient, and free of panic. "Who are you?" he finally asked. Naomi did not stop watching William. "Someone who refuses to waste precious time arguing." Those words settled over the room with unexpected weight. Even the frightened conversations around them faded into silence. Outside, distant, sirens slowly began weaving through downtown traffic, still several minutes away. Inside Harbor Table, every second suddenly felt much longer than the last. Then Naomi noticed something that made her heart tighten. William's breathing changed again, becoming even more irregular than before. She understood immediately that waiting quietly was no longer enough. Whatever was happening inside his body was moving faster than the ambulance could reach them, and if she hesitated now, the opportunity to save his life might disappear before anyone else even understood what was truly happening. Naomi took one slow breath, shutting out the frightened whispers, the ringing phones, and the heavy footsteps surrounding her. There was only the man lying on the floor and the next decision she had to make. She carefully checked his airway once more before placing her hand near his chest, watching every rise and fall with intense concentration. The rhythm was fading. It was not completely gone, but it was becoming dangerously weak. She looked toward the lead security officer. "I need you to listen to me very carefully. Your employer needs immediate medical assistance, and every second matters. If you trust me for just 1 minute, we give him a better chance." The man hesitated, his eyes shifting between William's motionless face and the determined woman kneeling beside him. Years of training had taught him never to let strangers near the man he was sworn to protect. Yet nothing in his experience had prepared him for this moment. Naomi was not frightened by the expensive suits, the stern expressions, or the invisible authority surrounding them. She was focused only on preserving a human life. "Everyone else, please give us room," she said firmly without raising her voice. "Fresh air. No crowding." The customers responded almost instinctively. Parents guided children toward the far side of the restaurant. An elderly couple quietly stood and offered folded jackets to cushion William's head, while another guest held the entrance open for the approaching emergency crew. Fear slowly transformed into cooperation because one calm voice had given people something they desperately needed: a purpose. Naomi continued speaking to William in the same reassuring tone. "Stay with us. You are not alone. Help is almost here." She watched his face carefully, hoping for the slightest sign of awareness. Nothing changed. She recognized the warning signs from lectures she had never expected to remember so clearly. Nearly 10 years earlier, she had ranked near the top of her nursing program before her mother's illness forced her to leave school and work full-time. Tuition became hospital bills. Clinical rotations became double shifts washing dishes and serving tables. Eventually those jobs became Harbor Table, the restaurant she built with borrowed money, sleepless nights, and faith that honest work could still build an honest future. She never regretted choosing family over ambition, but she had quietly wondered whether everything she learned had disappeared with time. At that moment, she realized it never had. Knowledge had simply been waiting for someone who needed it. A faint groan escaped William's lips before his breathing became even more uneven. Naomi immediately adjusted her position and continued monitoring him with steady hands. One of the younger security officers knelt beside her, his voice noticeably softer than before. "Tell me what you need." She looked at him with quiet gratitude. "When the paramedics arrive, tell them exactly what you saw from the moment he entered the restaurant. Every detail matters. Do not guess. Only tell the truth." He nodded without question. The distant sirens had grown louder now, echoing through the waterfront streets only a few blocks away. Relief began spreading across the room until Naomi noticed something that erased it almost instantly. On the table where William had been sitting, his untouched coffee cup remained beside a small silver spoon. She glanced at the dark liquid, then at the faint stains circling the inside of the porcelain. Something about it felt wrong. She could not explain why, but every instinct she had learned to trust whispered the same warning. This was more than an ordinary medical emergency. The first paramedic rushed through the front door, carrying a medical bag, while two others followed. Close behind with a stretcher. The lead security officer immediately stepped toward them, but before he could speak, Naomi calmly summarized everything she had observed from the first moment William entered the restaurant. She described the trembling in his hand, the sudden change in his breathing, the loss of color in his face, the exact minute he collapsed, and every visible symptom that followed. The senior paramedic listened without interrupting, his expression growing more serious with every sentence. "You noticed all of that before he lost consciousness?" he asked. Naomi simply nodded. "Please examine his heart first." Something changed very quickly. The medical team immediately began their assessment, while another paramedic attached monitoring equipment. The restaurant remained almost completely silent except for the soft electronic tones filling the room. Customers watched from a respectful distance, some quietly praying, others holding their breath as though even the smallest sound might interrupt the work being done. After several tense moments, the senior paramedic looked toward Naomi with visible respect. "You recognized the warning signs early," he said. "That helped us begin treatment much faster." One of William's security officers lowered his eyes, realizing the woman they had nearly pushed away had become the reason precious minutes had not been lost. Naomi stepped back to give the medical team more space, but her attention drifted once again toward the untouched coffee cup resting on the table by the window. The sunlight reflected across the dark surface of the remaining coffee, and something continued to trouble her. She walked slowly toward the table without disturbing anything. The cup had been served less than 5 minutes before William collapsed. She remembered pouring it herself from the same fresh pot used for 3 other customers that afternoon. None of those guests had become ill. She studied the table carefully. William had only taken a single sip before setting the cup down. The silver spoon beside it appeared perfectly clean, yet a faint, unfamiliar scent lingered near the rim of the cup. It was subtle, almost impossible to notice, beneath the rich smell of roasted coffee beans, but it did not belong. Naomi frowned. She did not jump to conclusions. Experience had taught her that assumptions often caused more harm than facts. Still, every instinct urged her not to let anyone clear the table. She turned toward the nearest employee. "Please do not touch anything here until the paramedics finish and the authorities arrive. Leave the dishes exactly as they are." The young waitress immediately nodded. One of the security officers overheard her request and walked toward the table himself. His eyes moved slowly across the cup, the spoon, and the untouched glass of water. "Why?" he asked quietly. Naomi answered with complete honesty. "I do not know if it means anything, but I know this. He drank almost nothing, and everyone else who had coffee from the same pot is perfectly fine. Until someone explains why, this table deserves answers." The officer stared at her for several long seconds before giving a silent nod. For the first time since entering Harbor Table, he no longer saw only a restaurant owner. He saw someone whose careful observations might have protected far more than a single afternoon. As the ambulance crew carefully prepared William for transport, another black luxury vehicle quietly stopped across the street. The people stepping out were not rushing, but the expressions on their faces suggested they had already heard enough to understand that this ordinary lunch had suddenly become something far more complicated than anyone inside the restaurant had imagined. The ambulance doors closed with a quiet metallic click before pulling away from Harbor Table, its flashing lights disappearing into the afternoon traffic along the waterfront. For several long moments, nobody inside the restaurant moved. The dining room that had been filled with conversations only minutes earlier now carried a silence so complete that even the gentle ticking of the wall clock seemed unusually loud. Naomi stood beside the table where William had collapsed, staring at the untouched coffee cup as if it might answer the questions forming inside her mind. She had built her life on noticing details other people overlooked, and every instinct told her that this story had only begun. A calm voice interrupted her thoughts. "Miss Brooks." She turned to find an older gentleman approaching with measured steps. His silver hair was neatly combed, his navy suit perfectly tailored, and although he wore no visible badge or insignia, every security officer in the room straightened the moment they saw him. "My name is Thomas Reynolds," he said politely. "I oversee Mr. Castellano's personal affairs." His tone carried authority without arrogance. Naomi offered a respectful nod. "I hope he is going to recover." Thomas studied her for several quiet seconds before answering. "According to the paramedics, your actions gave him valuable time. I wanted you to hear that from me." Naomi lowered her eyes briefly. "I only did what anyone should do." Thomas smiled faintly, almost sadly. "I have worked beside Mr. Castellano for 23 years. I assure you, not everyone would have." His words lingered in the air. Around them, employees slowly began cleaning overturned chairs and replacing dishes, but nobody touched the table by the window. The lead security officer had quietly instructed everyone to leave it exactly as Naomi requested. Even the half-filled coffee cup remained untouched beneath the afternoon sunlight. Thomas noticed her looking toward it. "You believe it matters." It was not a question. Naomi answered carefully. "I believe unusual things deserve careful attention before ordinary explanations." Thomas followed her gaze without speaking. He then reached into his pocket, removed a small notebook, and wrote a brief instruction before handing it to one of the security officers. The officer immediately stepped outside and made a phone call. Naomi did not ask whom he contacted. She simply appreciated that someone had listened instead of dismissing her concern. As customers gradually returned to their meals, several quietly stopped beside Naomi before leaving the restaurant. An elderly woman gently squeezed her hand and whispered, "Thank you for helping him." A construction worker placed a generous tip into the donation jar near the register before simply saying, "The world needs more people like you." Naomi smiled politely at each of them, but inside she felt no pride. Only relief that a stranger still had another chance to see tomorrow. Nearly an hour later, after the last emergency vehicle had departed, her phone rang. The caller identification displayed an unfamiliar hospital number. Naomi answered immediately. A calm nurse introduced herself before saying words that made Naomi close her eyes with quiet gratitude. "Mr. Castellano regained consciousness a few minutes ago." One of the first things he asked was who the woman was that refused to leave his side. Naomi exhaled slowly, unaware until that moment that she had been carrying the weight of uncertainty ever since he collapsed. Before she could respond, the nurse continued, "There is something else. He specifically requested to meet you as soon as his doctors allow visitors. He said there is something important he needs to understand, because he remembers hearing your voice before he opened his eyes, and he cannot explain why it felt strangely familiar." The following morning, Harbor Table opened exactly at 8 o'clock, just as it had every day for the past 7 years. Naomi believed consistency was another form of kindness. People depended on familiar places during uncertain times, and she refused to let yesterday's extraordinary events interrupt the ordinary comfort her customers expected. Fresh biscuits baked in the kitchen, coffee filled the dining room with its rich aroma, and sunlight reflected across the quiet harbor outside the windows. Yet beneath that peaceful routine, Naomi could not stop replaying every detail from the previous afternoon. She still wondered why William's condition had changed so suddenly after only one sip of coffee, and she still could not forget the strange scent lingering around the cup. Shortly after 10 o'clock, a black sedan stopped outside the restaurant. Thomas Reynolds stepped inside carrying a simple white bakery box instead of a briefcase. He smiled warmly as Naomi approached. "Good morning, Miss Brooks. Mr. Castellano insisted that I bring breakfast from the hospital cafeteria. He said the food was not nearly as good as yours, but he wanted to return the favor anyway." Naomi laughed softly for the first time since the incident. "That sounds like someone who is feeling much better." Thomas nodded. "His physicians expect a full recovery." Relief settled across Naomi's face before Thomas continued. He also asked me to give you something. He handed her a neatly folded piece of paper. It was not a check or a business card. It was simply a handwritten note. Naomi carefully unfolded it. The message contained only one sentence. Thank you for seeing a person before you saw a stranger. She quietly read the words again before folding the paper with the same care someone might give a treasured family photograph. Thomas watched her expression. You should know something about him, he said. Yesterday he instructed our team to learn everything about the woman who saved his life. We expected to discover a retired physician or emergency specialist. Naomi smiled modestly. You must have been disappointed. Thomas slowly shook his head. Quite the opposite. He reached into his folder and removed a single page. You were accepted into one of Maryland's best nursing programs at 19. Your professors described you as exceptional. Then, halfway through your education, you withdrew. Naomi looked toward the harbor before answering. My mother was diagnosed with cancer. She needed me more than the classroom did. Thomas nodded, as though confirming something important. You worked 3 jobs, paid every medical bill yourself, and stayed with her until the day she passed away. After that, you borrowed money, opened this restaurant, repaid every loan early, and have quietly donated free meals to the local senior center every Thanksgiving for the last 5 years. Naomi looked genuinely surprised. I never told anyone that. Thomas smiled gently. You did not have to. Good deeds have a habit of leaving quiet footprints. Before she could respond, his phone vibrated. He listened carefully for several moments before ending the call. The warmth in his expression slowly disappeared, replaced by thoughtful concern. The laboratory completed its preliminary examination of the coffee cup. Naomi immediately recognized the seriousness in his voice. And Thomas looked directly into her eyes. The physicians confirmed that Mr. Castellano suffered a serious medical emergency, but the laboratory also found evidence that the coffee itself contained something that did not belong there. The investigators now believe your instinct yesterday may have preserved far more than valuable evidence. It may have prevented the truth from disappearing before anyone knew there was a mystery to solve. For the next 3 days, Harbor Table became the center of quiet attention without Naomi ever asking for it. Reporters occasionally parked across the street. Curious customers stopped by hoping to catch a glimpse of the woman whose quick thinking had helped save a stranger's life, and flowers began appearing outside the front entrance with handwritten notes that simply read, "Thank you for reminding us that compassion still exists." Naomi accepted none of the attention as something she had earned. Every morning she unlocked the front door before sunrise, brewed fresh coffee, greeted her employees with the same warm smile, and reminded them that every guest deserved the same care whether they ordered a full meal or only a cup of coffee. She wanted life to return to normal. Instead, it kept moving in another direction. Late Thursday afternoon, Thomas Reynolds returned carrying a slim envelope instead of his usual notebook. His expression was serious, but not fearful. The investigators completed another round of interviews, he said quietly after taking a seat near the window where William had collapsed. Naomi poured him fresh coffee before sitting across from him. Did they learn anything? Thomas nodded slowly. More than anyone expected. He opened the envelope and carefully removed several printed photographs. They showed the restaurant entrance from nearby security cameras. Naomi recognized the timestamp immediately. They had all been taken less than 15 minutes before William arrived. Someone entered your restaurant pretending to be a delivery driver, Thomas explained. He remained inside for less than 90 seconds before leaving through the rear service entrance. Naomi studied the photographs carefully. The man wore a baseball cap pulled low over his face, a plain jacket, and carried a cardboard box with the name of a local bakery printed across the side. Nothing about him appeared unusual. Did he speak to anyone? She asked. Only briefly, Thomas answered. According to your employees, he claimed he had delivered to the wrong address. Naomi frowned. We never received bakery deliveries in the afternoon. Thomas gave a slow nod. Exactly. Before either of them could continue, Melissa hurried from the kitchen holding her phone. Naomi, I think you need to see this. She handed over the device. It displayed footage from the restaurant's own security system. Naomi watched the recording carefully. The man entered carrying the box, glanced around the dining room, and paused beside the beverage station while pretending to check a receipt. Only 6 seconds passed before he quietly walked away. 6 ordinary seconds that nobody had noticed at the time. Naomi replayed the clip once more. Then she suddenly froze the image. Can you zoom in on his left hand? Melissa enlarged the frame. The picture became grainy, but one small detail remained visible. A silver ring engraved with a blue anchor. Naomi's eyes widened with recognition. I have seen that ring before. Thomas looked at her immediately. Where? Naomi remained silent for several moments, searching her memory. Then she slowly turned toward the wall beside the register where dozens of photographs from community events had been displayed over the years. She walked directly to one taken almost 8 months earlier during a local charity fundraiser hosted at Harbor Table. More than 50 smiling faces filled the picture. Naomi pointed toward a man standing quietly in the back row. On his left hand rested the exact same silver ring with the engraved blue anchor. Thomas stared at the photograph before looking back at Naomi. You know him? Naomi swallowed slowly. Not personally, but he has eaten here many times. He always sat alone, always ordered the same lunch, and always paid in cash. I never thought twice about him. The room fell completely silent as both of them realized the same unsettling truth. Whoever had entered Harbor Table that afternoon had not chosen the restaurant by chance. He had already known it well. The following Monday, Harbor Table looked exactly as it always had from the outside, but inside the atmosphere carried a quiet sense of anticipation. Every employee knew investigators had been asking questions, yet Naomi insisted that kindness remained the restaurant's first responsibility. Fresh flowers decorated each table, soft jazz drifted through the dining room, and the smell of warm bread welcomed every guest who stepped through the door. Shortly after noon, the front entrance opened once again. This time there was no confusion, no hurried footsteps, and no frightened whispers. William Castellano walked inside under his own strength, dressed in a navy suit instead of the charcoal one he had worn days earlier. His complexion had returned, but his movements were slower, reminding everyone that recovery often continued long after the emergency had ended. The conversations throughout the restaurant gradually faded until only the gentle clinking of silverware remained. Naomi stepped from behind the register with the same calm smile she offered every customer. Welcome back, she said simply. William returned the smile. I promised myself that if I walked out of that hospital, my first meal would be here. She guided him to the same table beside the window. For a brief moment, both of them looked at the polished wooden floor where everything had changed. Neither mentioned it. Naomi poured fresh coffee into a new cup before quietly placing it in front of him. William looked at the cup for several seconds before meeting her eyes. I trust your coffee, he said with a faint smile. More importantly, I trust the person serving it. Naomi appreciated the compliment, but answered with quiet honesty. Trust is something people earn every day. Thomas Reynolds, standing nearby, watched the exchange with quiet satisfaction. Before anyone could continue, 2 investigators entered the restaurant carrying folders rather than urgency. They greeted Naomi politely before approaching William. The senior investigator opened his file and spoke clearly enough for everyone at the table to hear. The laboratory completed its final report this morning. We identified the individual who entered the restaurant using the false delivery uniform. He had no connection to your staff, Miss Brooks, and no employee assisted him in any way. Your restaurant was never the problem. Naomi released a breath she had not realized she had been holding for days. The investigator continued. Your decision to preserve the table exactly as it was allowed forensic specialists to recover evidence that otherwise would have been lost. That evidence led directly to identifying the suspect. The investigation is continuing, but your actions protected both the truth and your business. William looked around the restaurant, noticing employees quietly returning to work and customers smiling with visible relief. He slowly stood, raising his coffee cup just slightly. Ladies and gentlemen, he said in a calm voice that carried across the room. Many people measure strength by power, influence, or wealth. Last week I learned that real strength sometimes wears a simple apron, serves homemade soup, and refuses to walk away when someone needs help. No one applauded immediately. Instead, the room became completely still. Naomi lowered her eyes, visibly uncomfortable with public praise. William gently placed a small envelope on the table beside her. This is not payment, he said before she could refuse it. Kindness cannot be purchased. Inside is an invitation to establish a scholarship in your mother's name for nursing students who believe their dreams ended because life became too difficult. I would like to fund the first 10 years if you are willing to choose the recipients." Naomi stared at the envelope in disbelief, her eyes beginning to fill with quiet emotion. Around them, every person in Harbor Table understood they were witnessing something far greater than gratitude. They were watching one act of compassion grow into hope for countless strangers who had not even met yet. 1 year later, the lunch crowd at Harbor Table was larger than ever, but very little about Naomi Brooks had changed. She still arrived before sunrise to unlock the front door herself, still greeted every customer with the same warm smile, and still believed that the smallest acts of kindness often carried the greatest weight. The walls of the restaurant now displayed photographs from community events, local school fundraisers, and the first class of nursing students who had received scholarships through the Grace Brooks Memorial Foundation, named in honor of Naomi's mother. Every scholarship recipient had faced hardships that once seemed impossible to overcome, and every one of them carried forward the opportunity Naomi herself had once been forced to leave behind. The foundation had quietly become one of the most respected charitable programs in the city, not because of publicity, but because it transformed gratitude into opportunity. Shortly after noon, the familiar black sedan stopped outside the restaurant. There were fewer security vehicles than before, and they remained respectfully across the street instead of surrounding the entrance. William Castellano stepped inside, wearing a simple sport coat without the formal appearance that had once made every room feel tense. Several regular customers recognized him and smiled politely before returning to their conversations. Harbor Table had become one of the few places where he could simply be another guest. Naomi walked over carrying a menu she knew he no longer needed. "The usual?" she asked with a smile. William nodded. "The seafood chowder and fresh coffee. I finally learned not to skip lunch." They both laughed softly. As she walked toward the kitchen, William noticed a young nursing student sitting alone near the window, studying anatomy textbooks while eating soup. Nearby, an elderly couple shared dessert. At another table, construction workers, teachers, office employees, and tourists all enjoyed the same welcoming atmosphere. No one received special treatment. That had always been Naomi's quiet philosophy. Every person deserved dignity before they earned recognition. Thomas Reynolds looked around the dining room and spoke almost to himself. Amazing how one afternoon changed so many lives. William gently stirred his coffee before answering. No. One decision changed them. His eyes followed Naomi as she stopped to help a little girl tie the ribbon on her birthday balloon before carrying another tray to a family celebrating an anniversary. She never acted differently because important people were watching. She acted that way because nobody was too unimportant to deserve kindness. Before leaving, William quietly walked to the scholarship photographs displayed near the entrance. Beneath them hung a small bronze plaque chosen by Naomi instead of placing anyone's name on the front of the building. It carried only a single sentence. "Respect begins with the way we treat those who can do nothing for us in return." William read the words slowly before smiling to himself. He finally understood why her voice had sounded so familiar when he regained consciousness that day in the hospital. It was not because they had ever met before. It was because genuine compassion always speaks the same language. As he stepped outside into the warm afternoon sunlight, Harbor Table continued serving meals, pouring coffee, and welcoming strangers exactly as it always had. Nothing about the building suggested that an extraordinary story had unfolded there. Yet everyone whose life had been touched by that single afternoon carried the lesson forward in quiet ways. Some chose medicine. Some chose generosity. Some simply became a little kinder to the next stranger they met. And on that ordinary street beside the harbor, the world remembered that dignity is never measured by power, wealth, or reputation, but by the simple choice to help another human being when it matters most.